Sponsor Itential's FlowAI delivers agentic operations for infrastructure, meaning easily built AI agents that actually work the way engineers need them to. Govern, deterministic, and built for production. Add intelligent automation to your network operations without the usual AI chaos. Find out more at itential.com/4AI. That's itential.com/FLOWAI. Hello and welcome to the Network Automation Nerds podcast, where we explore the latest in network automation from a practitioner's perspective. I'm your host, Eric Cho, a network engineer who loves everything about network automation. Today, we're joined by Matt Remke, who has spent years in the trenches of network automation projects as a consultant. I have witnessed firsthand how Matt tackles tough challenges of scaling automation in real-world environments for some of the world's largest companies. Matt will share what works, what backfired, and some of the hard-earned lessons, which is my favorite part. So let's jump in. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, Eric. Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Matt Remke. I'm a senior engagement manager with Network to Code. And I think for those unfamiliar, Network to Code is a network automation services provider and also the parent and owner of Nautobot, who a lot of folks are, I think, growing increasingly familiar with. My role is more than a project manager. I'm sort of like a project delivery orchestrator. So project management to me is box checking, following a rote process. The type of delivery leadership that we're talking about is engaging with clients under pressure, under stress. They need results, assembling teams, our team, their team, bridging gaps, crushing silos, and orchestrating the overall delivery.
Yeah, speaking like a true leader, Matt, like I sure saw your expertise back there. So yes, please do correct me when I make mistakes like that. Smash Eric. Matt +1.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I think oftentimes I feel like, how that story goes where, maybe four blind guys touching an elephant and everybody like kind of sees a partial of that picture, right? So as a network engineer, oftentimes I feel like I'm one of those guys who I'm limited my visibility by, my experience, my exposure. But in your role, it's sort of like you taking a higher level perspective, right? And then you need to be both details as well as looking at the big picture, seeing wherever all the pieces fit. Is that where you're trying to get at?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm a technical layperson. I am not a hands to keyboard engineer, although I deeply admire and respect this community. I worked with many hundreds of you, and it's fascinating. I take a view in terms of more of from a business owner standpoint, but like you said, the big picture of where the value is, what we're trying to achieve for success. But also I need to understand, at least in broad strokes, the technical goings on, the technical discussions, the decisions that are needing to get made, consider options, assess risks, understand timelines. So, but for me, it's just being there and understanding and putting the pieces together of the technical big picture that's happening and fitting that, again, like you said, with the overall view of, okay, what does the person who writes the checks for these projects want to see? And really, how do we present? That's right. Well, how do we present what we're going through and what we're learning and how we're delivering in a way that they can understand? And it just doesn't sound like the cartoon teacher from the Peanuts cartoons.
Yeah, exactly.
Wah,
Like
wah,
they don't
wah.
care about VLANs or they don't care about, trunking or whether it's one queue or not. They really care about delivering business results. And you're there to translate that to engineers like me, as well as, vice versa, right? Translate that
Mhm.
technical bit and say, well, we do want that X technology because it delivered
That's
this
right.
result.
So that's probably why I'm probably different from a lot of guests on this podcast, because I'm kind of like you mentioned, I'm kind of that clutch plate between the
Mhm.
technical delivery and the management operation, the business enterprise vision that's happening. The goddess there, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I'm excited to have you here because you do offer that different perspective, right? Like a lot of times we're very focused on technical details. So I'm here to listen to your thoughts and the lessons learned on, what kind of value that we could bring to our audience so that they are aware of a person like you is not trying to, I don't know, rain on the parade or something, right? Sometimes that's the case, but they're trying to make it better.
That's really what I would hope to accomplish here, is just to enlighten that piece of perspective for those who might be curious about it.
Nice. So now that we got out of the way, I am curious a little bit about how you got here, Matt, because you know, you're kind of in that bridge, right? So how does someone like you came to this place on, having this kind of this transition, points? So what's your background? Have you always been like interested in technology, or were you a business oriented person?
Yeah, I mean, I am, full disclosure, I'm almost 50. So I was growing up, I got, it was a big deal to get a boombox in the early 80s, with the Police or Hall and Oates, so I was at the stage where things went from 3 channels and rabbit ears antenna to a cable box with a 20-foot cord with, 2 rows of 36 channels that turned into the Atari 2600, and then, going from rotary dial phones to cordless phones. And so a lot of that, the technological development hockey stick was my formative years. So I don't think I was nearly as hands-on and aware of the technical genius or the technical machinery that was happening in front of me. I just kind of accepted it as, my world's different than my parents and grandparents, but I was aware. Anyway, um, so, growing up, I was a sharp kid, but went to college, thought I was, took a look at engineering, you know, ran into engineering calc. Had to hustle up a tutor to squeak out. I would to go from a 50 to a passing grade, but I was like, you know, I was always one of those. Maybe an arrogant person, but some of the math made me flinch. But I'm also had a real mind for just kind of how things work. So I've always been a process guy. I was very interested, and I really excelled at like biochemistry and physiology, and so I was really kind of hard in the pre-med track, and I really enjoyed that. But then as I got out of school, um, I was looking at it, and I was like, okay, what's it going to cost me to go get a doctor, and do I really want to do that? And
Right,
it's
like
I'm
another
looking at
100K and 7 years
well,
later.
even back then, you're looking at 8 years and $250,000, and I was like, I
Yeah.
could do better than that. Oh, I could do better than that. Anyway, so off I go. What I actually did was graduate college a year early because I wanted to go be a ski instructor, uh,
Mm,
and uh, and my mom was like, the privilege that you have to go to school is you can't be taken lightly like that. So I said, okay, great. I'm just going to finish it. I'm going to ace it, and then I'm going to go be a superstar.
mm,
But anyway, I did get out of there, went to be a ski instructor, came back, and then through a staffing firm, got into the startup in the year 1998 that will become known as art.com. So what
mhm,
happened with the dot-com bubble is everyone was throwing big capital at everything. Art.com was one of those. It was owned by some outfit out of Chicago, but they crashed. So we ended up kind of buying that domain and intellectual property assets as from what we were all wall. Now we're art.com. And that started a true experience, just explosive 300% year over year growth for a company that sold posters,
mhm,
art prints, and custom framed art on the internet back
mhm.
in the early days when eBay was going crazy and Amazon was still selling books.
Right.
Um, yeah, so from that point, I just kind of applied myself. Just I'm ambitious, hard charging. So I built out human resources. I worked in the customer service. I worked call center. I ran facilities. I did construction build out management projects when we expanded the plant. I did process and quality management for basically a distribution outfit as well as a small manufacturing outfit, which was custom framing. So we have all these art prints. You choose what frame you want, how you want it, and then we custom size cut it, package it, ship it. So that was my deal. So when I started with that company, I was employee 12, and when I left, there was over 350 employees, and we had just done a venture capital merge, and things went sideways. That's a separate podcast after that, but I accumulated a ton of experience, and a lot of it around process, understanding process, fixing things that are broken, fixing them fast. And then we need to accomplish this sort of build out this new capability. And I would be the spearhead of those projects from in my early 20s. So
Yeah.
long story longer, went to grad school, took a startup job in DC, um, selling it was a director of ops for a startup brewing company when the housing bubble burst and diesel fuel went from $3 a gallon to $5.75 a gallon. We were selling a perishable product that needed to be transported long distances and refrigerated the whole way. So that ended. I kind of bailed back into Raleigh from DC, and then I found NTC through Optum, where a former coworker had graduated from Optum to Network Dakota. I followed the coattails, and I've been applying kind of my project delivery skills to network automation projects ever since. But that didn't take too long.
No, no. I mean, I think that's what I also miss about, a startup or, because I've been to both worlds, but like you, I started my career in a startup and during the for me, tail end of the dot-com bubble, that it really were very, very different hats, right? Like, and because the company was growing so fast that they were allowing me to, just a junior guy to do all kinds of stuff. And you make mistakes, but an ambitious, driven guy like yourself could get a lot of experience and hard-earned lessons from there. And I am just interested on how you went from all of that, right? Brewing and framing artwork and all that. So that was very interesting to me. But like you said, that's like to get into that, that's like another whole different episode, right?
Yeah.
So fast
Yes,
forward
but
to
yes, I came from my core mindset. I love the startup. I love the action.
yeah.
And I love the mindset of we'll give you as much responsibility as you can be accountable for.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So that's the it's like a kid in a candy shop for someone that's like really super hyper motivated for however they define achievement. If it's business success, then go crazy.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I've read a lot of business books on leaders I respect, and a lot of times they recommend going to big companies to learn their process and see how it works, but don't overstay. I mean, as a young person, right? Like, I'm not putting judgments, I'm just kind of paraphrasing what they're saying, but don't overstay for more than 2 or 3 years. You want that exposure, you want to go to a place where, they will allow you to make mistakes, and that could be an established company because even like you said, Amazon, right? When I was there, even though they were more or less established, but they were still, quote unquote, always day one. So,
that's right.
5 years. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it just like kind of depends on the environment, but definitely, take kind of looking at your experience as a mirror that there are certain advantages of being in a startup and being in an environment where they allow you to wear many different hats.
I agree. And I that's something that I might, we may talk about later, but I believe in reps. It's the same in business as it is in education, as it is in athletics. Those who actually really get their hands dirty and get those reps, um, there's an accumulative benefit that comes from it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, just to paraphrase an athletic world, right? Remember the first time you do a bench press? Even the motion was unfamiliar to you, right? Just having even like an empty bar, 45 bar. It's
Can't
like,
balance and
yeah, I can balance. It's like the weight falling
get the
off.
bar
You're just
wobble.
like, but just do 4 sets, right? And then on the fifth set, you're just like, okay, now I get familiar with. Now I could focus on adding on the weights, making the motions accurately, and you're finding that 1% improvement. Then those reps really count, as opposed to repeating the same rep 100 times. You're trying to make yourself
Mhm.
1% better every single time when you lift that bar, and that's what counts. So let's go and move toward the first, well, maybe not the first, but if you could walk us through a recent network automation project, right? Like think back in your high level view, just looking at it from start to finish, what was kind of the process and the most surprising part as a person in your role?
Okay, well, probably the one that comes to mind, we did a major application migration for a major client that we've been with for a number of years, from an older on-prem version of the application up to the updated version and also a cloud install. So
Hmm.
so there was an element of establishing the cloud and the footprint and the connectivity. And then there's the element of the migration from the old version of the on-prem app to the new version in the cloud that's then working. And this was a big deal. This was a major version. So we knew there was breaking changes. And we also knew that the client had a lot of devices, a lot of legacy data that had been operating for years. Um, you know, the start to finish, I guess the TLDR is there's so much hurry up and wait, especially in with the cloud piece,
Hmm.
and from our viewpoint, it was a lot of waiting for them to identify what the design path is, what the architectural connectivity, how are they going to perform,
Hmm.
and then having the approval of that, and it probably took 4 months. And then on the other side, once that was done, us handling the actual, moving the dirt of getting the migration completed, that went really, really well. But it took another 6 months, again, waiting. And I guess what I want to reflect on here is, from our standpoint and from the network engineer's standpoint, this is
Hmm.
unbelievably frustrating. When we're saying we've been waiting, we've been following up every single day for 3 months, and then we finally get a break. But this is a big deal for these big companies, and the risk for them of a misstep is existential. So the perspective is, from my standpoint, knowing this client and knowing what we're going into, I wasn't surprised that a, 5 to 6 month effort took 10 to 11 months. But
Hmm.
that's what it took. I mean, in the meantime, our team had to complete our work. The client wasn't ready to do their migration. They didn't need us for it, but at that point, we are the hands on, we're the doctors in the white coats, right? So they want us there. So we actually had to kind of pause the engagement, put our pencils down, and then come back 2 months later to complete the final go live piece of this. So anyway, I guess that this is characterized by the work was understood. It took almost twice as long as it should, but it was all client side delays. But I'm not putting shade on the client necessarily. There's just so much that goes into these companies. As far as, this is the first time they're doing things like, they're not adept. Um, Migrating anything to the cloud is not a new thing. How do we handle the connectivity to support the underlying business that it, has never been in the cloud? These aren't necessarily straightforward decisions, and even when we escalate, say this decision, you have this option or you have this option, let's just execute.
Yeah.
Even the let's just execute part can be complicated
But
for these
what can be
clients.
done better though? So are we just always try? Should we just always build in like a buffer time, like you would take twice as long, or it's going to be over budget, or is there
Yeah,
something that could have been done better?
I think, well, we were very proactive on this and jumping on it on day one. My take personally is that you need to be proactive. You need to be communicating about it transparently. You need to have acknowledgement of what the situation is on the client side for a deal like this. But I think that there's going to just be adoption in the industry once this becomes a more commonplace. Once this is more standard operating procedure, I think that we are breaking ground with these automation initiatives with a lot of these
Hmm.
big clients. And I think there's just a level of inertia and hesitance to change that we're going to have to just kind of grind through. And I think it'll kind of organically improve. It would be my take on that.
So I guess the lesson learned is, for the first time that you're doing this in your company, you should plan for some of this hiccups, or you should build in that buffer time. And then when the second time is, then that might be a better experience.
That's a brilliant takeaway, and I think it's one of the most important things that I always talk to teams about when we talk about forming up a backlog, establishing an action plan, forecasting what this is going to take. The first time is the worst time. Every time you build new versus increment on existing, it can be 3 times more time consuming, complicated, challenging, more impediments, that are maybe simple, but you're still relying on somebody else to do something that they're unfamiliar with. So I'd almost say as an engineer, when you're looking at something that you've never done before, take your
Mhm,
most conservative, think about it for 10 minutes. They take your most conservative estimate and triple it. And
mhm.
if that causes paralysis, double it, but explain why it's so heavy. Now, once you've established it and done it the first time, then you really get that um, logarithmic slope, improvement and speed and refinement of the process. It always works that way, especially with these complicated projects. And there's nothing that isn't complicated about network automation engineers taking all of this chaos and madness and making it work every time.
Yeah,
So,
but also what I heard, Matt, like it's kind of interesting you said backlogs, right? So documentation, document your process so that don't waste a struggle, right? Don't waste the challenge. Like if you ran into the challenge and you solved it, but document like the process, what was taking long, and then so you can look back and learn from those lessons, right? If it all, kind of just live in one person's mind, then that's no use to organization. So another lesson, I guess, from what I took away for the 5 minutes is that you're gonna run into these, expect them, but also document them so you could share that knowledge later on. So the next project would be better.
yes, and that's that's a core part of what we do. It's kind of one of it's one of the core lean principles is what we're trying to do in everything is to build the quality in. So
Mm,
you want to identify what the challenge is, what the solution path looks like, what the acceptance criteria, what would delight the client, and then you know once you understand these things, it's easy to keep adding breadcrumbs to it. And then every time box, if you're running an agile, or even if you're just running a Kanban, or periodically, you want to review what happened, and pick out the things that were painful, pick out the things that really worked well, that you can radiate that information out. And so there's this process of inspection, adaptation, and continuous improvement, but you can only really do that if you're building the quality in to begin with. So yes, you need to mark the tracks that way. It's a good habit.
yeah.
Takes a few seconds longer, saves thousands of hours for
For
teams in the
sure. I
long run.
think, and also, it gets you to prioritize the low hanging fruit and which one was the most painful part, right? Because if you ask me on some of the difficult projects, it's almost like I could list five or six things that are really painful in my mind. But and when I look at, the time it actually took, or if I just sit down and kind of put a point system on, this was a 8 out of 10, this was like a 5 out of 10, then I quickly realized the 5 to 10 things I list are maybe may or may not accurately reflect like the actual pain, right? But if you document it, like you said, continuously reiterate the process, then and assigning like a data science way or scientific way to evaluate them, then you could come to an agreement as a team that yes, we need to tackle X first because
Yes.
look at last project.
Yes, and you build that you definitely that's it, to the extent that you can that this is a team building conversation. To the extent that you can maintain team continuity for any given period of time, it really starts paying big dividends after a team that's well formed can operate more than 6 months together.
Hmm.
But yeah, anyway, these are all critical best practices that it builds the foundation upon which when you ask questions like what does it take to really get it done, it's having these fundamental blocks as part of your standard behavior gives you
Hmm.
the opportunity to move quick and be flexible, which is
Yeah, I
where
mean,
yeah.
how many NFL teams or pick your sport of choice, right? Win the championship on the first year the core teams are together, and how many of them are like after 2 or 3 years they fail together, they've grown through those bumps and the tears and sweats and blood, and then on the fourth year they went through. So I mean, like I said, pick the your sport of choice, but typically I think there are teams that won the first year, but the typical process is that you have to go through those humps. So back to what
Dude,
you talked about, team
yes.
continuity.
And Eric, let me and that's thank you for that. And you asked me what was in a recent project, what was the biggest surprise, right?
Yeah.
All right. My Despite all the delays, that's I expected that. That's just my advice on the delays and things is think it through up front, understand what these are, communicate all the various steps because there are pitfalls out there. Communicate them, but be patient and have perspective. Don't let it frustrate you as an automation engineer.
Mhm.
Now, biggest surprise. the whole concept of the 10,000 hours concept, if you heard about it, it's a Gladwell concept. But basically, the idea is, you, in general, you will be objectively considered a master at any craft if you put 10,000 hours into it.
Right.
I believe in that strongly, and I think that not only is the 10,000 hours concept a legit thing, it doesn't stop at 10,000 hours, right?
Mhm.
I'm seeing, it pops to me when I see 20,000 hour people operating. And
Mhm.
both of the guys on this job that I was talking about, this big migration with a lot of risk, are that caliber. I mean, unbelievable. They were doing the. Have you ever seen the kung fu movies where the two teammates are fighting off from their backs are together, and then they kind of lock arms and swap, and they're fighting the other side? That's what these guys were doing as they were transitioning in and out because of the delays, and then they still just nailed it, and it was beautiful. And so my biggest surprise was it's still stunning every time you see just a great performance come together. And I'm saying the accumulation of their experience was just slapping me in the face.
Nice, nice.
I mean,
I
what do you
like
think
that
about that?
analogy. Yeah, I like that analogy, And I don't know how many, of our listeners watch kung fu movies, right? But yeah, I could recommend a few, some of the Jackie Chan's, even the Bruce Lee's, they do back to back, and then it's almost like it's the same person, you carbon copy them, and then they just swapped, and yeah,
So,
that's
so these
funny.
are true operators. As I'm saying that from my vantage point, it is the real world class people who love this and do it, and they seek all the challenges like we were talking about earlier. They seek the reps, and they
Mhm.
get this good, and they accumulate all this knowledge. I mean, it's amazing what these guys can do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
You
a
guys are
fan of
just
10,000
special.
Hour as well. I've read most of Malcolm Gladwell's, books, and also attended his, watch his talks. But I do want to also compliment what you just said with the fact that it's a deliberate practice. So it's 10,000 hours, but it's not 1 hour repeated 10,000 times, right? Like it's looking at back to what you were talking about, finding out, the logs and you putting the rep, but in every hour, incremental hour of practice, you want to go correct that weakest point or of whatever that process that was the weakest link, so that the overall process becomes stronger. So I like what you talk about that project, and but if you look at all the projects that you've worked on throughout the years, including non-network engineering projects, so what are some of the common mistake or the anti pattern, quote unquote, in the automation projects?
Yeah. There's a lot of them, and I use it. I like
There's
that
a
term.
lot of
I
them.
like
I
that
like
term
that.
anti-pattern, but
Yep.
I'm just approaching it from the standpoint of my experience with automation projects,
Yes.
because also an agile buzzword, and I'm deep certed in agile, but that's a different kind of conversation. But
Okay.
I would say the biggest things that I'm always looking at and I'm always contending with
Hmm.
are silos, defended silos within client. Now, so the audience here is anybody who's implementing automation projects within a commercial enterprise. Um, Defended silos and inter-silo friction and inertia. Understanding, having these chains that don't work together, or they're defending ground, or like there's politics involved, especially with a lot of older these companies that we're working with. That they've been around a long time. They've got a lot of established culture that goes back into the 1800s. Some of them talk about telecoms.
Right,
So
right, right.
think about a telecom like a Cox Communication. Their business. Um, They've got business high speed internet. They've got local cable and internet. They're now getting into Wi-Fi and streaming, and so they've got this equipment of different types in different markets. And it used to be where these were standalone business units, but we get into network automation. By its nature, networking is all about kind of breaking silos, connecting silos together that previously weren't connected. And so this is kind of what David Ezel. This is the thing I mentioned to you before. He says what we're doing is this automation and technological industry as it's growing is transforming our entire networking industry. It's turning it upside down because it brings into question the question of ownership.
Mhm.
You, plant manager, run a DC in, Austin, Texas. Are those your servers? Because we need to be able to have the network interact with those servers from other business units. It's an exit. We have to have it. So we get into so this is the big challenge of this is people are entrenched with the silo. I live in the silo. These are my machines. I own this organization. You're not going to tell me what to do with anything, that sort of thing. Versus the other way of saying, you've got the physical material and the physical plant, but its purpose, it's owned by the network. It's owned by the network owns that. That's how its single source of truth is accounted for everywhere. Um, Anyways, a big anti pattern is understanding it's important to at least understand from as a consultant what players are working together, which players are at odds with each other. Because if we're asked to deliver a project where the goal line is defended by a silo that is really, really entrenched, that from a strategic delivery standpoint is something that we need to understand, and we need to have that be well understood by our client sponsor as well. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, big big silo problem is a big anti-pattern in automation projects. It's almost ever present. There are outfits running it the right way. I don't want to say it's 99.9%, but it's prevalent.
Yeah.
Another one would be um, if your leadership, ultimately the top leadership, is completely disengaged, unavailable, uninformed, won't want to be informed. When you inform them, they don't stay informed. If they're disengaged like that, there's a lot of risk there. A lot of automation projects do so much great work only to be politically undercut by
Mhm.
leadership turnover and changes, things like that.
Mhm.
So, from a network automation engineer standpoint, one who wants to be on the grind, delivering the hardcore coded value, be aware of things going on like that in terms of who's the big boss. Is the big boss enthused about this automation that's being delivered? They should be, because that's the great power that we're in it for.
Yeah.
But if they're disconnected, or if there are other cooks in the kitchen, that could be just an unstable employment situation. Just be aware of that one. And then taking kind of it back to the teams, the biggest problem we have is we make assumptions without vetting and validating the given approach is going to work. We say, okay,
Mm.
we're coming into an engagement. We're going to do it this way. We got to get quickly with the client about what this way means, because when we talk about firewalls and we talk about databases and we talk about OS versions and we talk about things like, a lot of the devil is in the details, and we need to stop making assumptions about that. Um, well, you need to make assumptions to get the ball rolling, but you need to validate those assumptions methodically, and they need to be validated on priority in terms of critical path.
Yeah. So trust, but verify, right? And
And be diligent about it. Like, actually do if this is an unpleasant work for somebody who, the engineer that's really on the front line doing this, somebody will pick it up. Maybe. And if you're in a team, tell somebody to follow up on it. Tell your Matt Remke that you need to track this as a risk. We need to actually facilitate conversations with the client, make sure that we run this thing
got
up
it.
front, because you can spend months and put months into something, and then you finally get into a demonstration presentation, and you got a stakeholder saying, that's totally a different format. That's totally one that won't work. That won't work for this. It may work for that piece, but not this piece. And now it's real. It's real. So it's better to take your medicine up front. That
Yeah.
way, you're not in the operating table
Right.
down the line.
Right. So, and by the way, Cox was on episode 83 for, network automation nerds. And I really do enjoy that conversation as well. So if any of our listeners are interested, we're having the show notes and they could go back to, listen to from their own words, right? Like how they solve these problems, or if they encounter these problems and how do they, come about in their solution. But Matt, I think you mentioned it a little bit, along with what you talked about on, make assumptions, but validate assumptions, the breaking the silos. So I want to ask, is there any solutions that you would take? Let's just take defending silos, for example, right? Like, how do we break that? If you observe that, how do we conquer that problem?
This quick break is courtesy of sponsor Itential. Here we are in 2026, and AI has become part of our automation. But AI often behaves in ways we engineers hate. We don't trust the answers LLMs give us. Having AI understand what's going on in our specific network with our specific devices, policies, and constraints, that's been nearly impossible. This is the problem Itential FlowAI was built to solve. Itential delivers agentic operations for infrastructure, a framework where AI agents reason and plan, but all execution runs through deterministic, governed paths that enforce your security policies and give you full auditability. You could build workflows when you need repeatability or let agents reason through novel scenarios on the fly, governed, not chaotic. The advantage, you don't need predefined workflows for every scenario. Your agents can reason about network data, plan operations intelligently, and execute through controlled, auditable paths. It's AI that extends your capabilities without replacing your judgment or bypassing your governance. There's a lot happening here, and agentic operations for infrastructure is moving fast. Find out more at itential.com/4AI. There's an architectural white paper worth reading there, and you don't have to give up your contact information to do so. itential.com/flowai and tell them the packet pushers sent you.
My first prong of attack on this one is to make sure that, hands above the table, we're communicating up through our sponsor client level chain of command. We're seeing this, we have this experience, this is our perception. There's few different ways we can approach that, but we're going to only approach it if we're agreed on how that needs to happen.
Okay.
So that's the strategic angle. You need to make sure that if you need cover fire, or if there's some discussions need to be had at the leadership level, that they're the ones having it, and we're not the people getting chopped up in the meat grinder. But the other thing to do is let's just hypothetically say we know that we have an absolute delivery dependency on a Fort silo over there. If we have that dependency on them, the way that we have to continue to make contact with them. So if they're a dependency, we're going to be in contact, but that contact needs to be congenial. It needs to be constructive. It needs to be appreciative. Like, we're not just some, mercenary contractor that's come in here to do this. We're trying to help make the whole system better, and let's talk about it, but we're here for it.
Yeah.
You can gain a lot of respect by actually showing up face to face. And even if you have to show up face to face for several weeks at a time, typically, if your heart is in the right place and you have good, positive intent, you can, at least at the tactical, at the level that the teams are interacting, they can establish rapport. And that rapport can go a long way, because the trust goes right back up the chain to somebody who may not be in the room when that relationship's getting strengthened.
Got it. Yeah. So I think, Matt, you're mostly coming from a outside consultant perspective on talking about that, but I think it's also useful, even if you're pushing an internal project, so everybody's under the same roof. But if you just treat yourself as a quote unquote consultant, those recommendations still applies, right? Because you may not have a direct influence, you don't have formal authority over this person, but recognizing it, maybe the defending the silo would be the first step, and then a genuine communication or having that conversation with the leadership, even as an internal employee pushing for those projects, still applies and valid per your approach.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of when I talk about this friction, it doesn't come from the technologists. The language of network automation is understood by all that can read it. So it's easy to build good relationships when you're good. You mean well. You know, the big picture is you're trying to improve outcomes. So it's good. It's easy to be strong and come in the right place. got to bear that in mind. That's why I
Yeah.
think one of the important things to do when setting up projects is let's do our homework on the front side and let's understand what relationships we need to be paying attention to and strengthening. Also, what are the big decision points that this client has no idea about that we need to get them thinking about soon, because this is going to be a tricky decision to get made here. So, yeah.
So I like that. So having a good intention, right? Because that would be pretty obvious on your intention and when you're doing the communication and what you talked about, assessing pressure points and hairy issues up front. That's a perfect segue into my next question, right? Because coming from your perspective, if you were to start like a new network automation project today, right? And what are some of the things that you would do? And one thing you already mentioned was just to take a moment to not jump in, like the engineer in me always want to just get hands on keyboard and start like hemming out, ordering parts and doing network designs, right? But you say, hey, from your perspective, like slow down a little bit, do assessment first. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Great. Yeah. So just to skip quickly over, because I touched on it.
Hmm.
Understand your organization and the technical landscape that you're about to start operating in. And that means, like, who are the critical stakeholders to the outcome? What's the technical landscape? What are they working with? And do we know for sure where they're headed, or what are their standards and practices? What are hardware do they've got? What's their footprint look like? Are they a regional outfit with one data center, or do they have 13 data centers all over the globe? Anything that we can find out, even if we just pose the questions, it's good to get an understanding of that as soon as possible, because the scale of your approach will be informed by it. Okay. The other one is, and I mentioned, s- understand the value. Where's the value at? As an MBA, we talk, what's the value stream map? But essentially, you don't have to go crazy with this, but it is worth a diligent effort between you and any other stakeholders that are getting hands-on or decision makers in the process. And it's basically, let's visualize whatever. Let's just, we're an outfit that has, 100 processes we do on a month-to-month basis. Start automating. Okay, Pareto analysis. Give me the most common. What's the most basic? Give me the ones that are the big ones. Give me the ones where, 20% of your use cases are 80% of the volume of the work or the value you deliver. Get a sense of what the inputs and the outputs are. Ideally, and my guys don't like doing this, and I'm curious why, but even if it's a whiteboard, and it could turn into an architectural diagram, but draw the picture. What is the workflow that you currently are? What does your current existence look like from a workflow standpoint, even if it's rudimentary? And then what is a future state? And just the diff between those two will start illuminating, well, if we want to go here, we need to understand we have to map the dependencies and what the whole flow looks like, because then you can actually communicate to the business people that hold the purse strings. So once you understand the various pieces, then you can just ballpark, but do it just an earnest estimate. Understand time lag and time on keyboard. How long does it take? How many steps? And so you understand what the cost of the overall output is, and that way you can understand where you can save costs, or it gives you once you understand where you're at and where you're headed, you can communicate it broadly fast, which is essential to get common understanding, because you're always going to be preaching it all the time. um, so you can get common understanding, but you can also make good decisions. So you can look at the future state and say, all right, well, look, we can knock out this step and automate this step, and we could spend 200 hours and it would save them 200 grand. Or we could knock out this step and we could spend 100 hours and it would save them $15 million. You can prioritize and knock out which steps of the value chain you need to optimize in sequence, or in a orchestrated plan with that. So just understand the big picture,
Right.
and be able to have honest and efficient communications with your leadership about the takes and puts. Do we do this or do we do that? Or if we're going to do this, our option is this, but maybe this, but we better look into it because we may not be able to get approvals to whatever. Anyway, but that helps you map out the approach so that you don't go charging 80% down a path that dead ends. And now all of a sudden you sunk all that time and effort into something that is never going to fly. And now you got to double back. So that
Yeah.
little methodical, patient approach up front, and then periodically you're going to have to do this because scope changes as well as I do. But at least where your true north is, and
Mhm.
you can make sure as you go through the days and weeks, are you still more or less headed true north here? So I
Yeah.
think that's an important piece, and then the last piece that I think is real important, aside from the shared objectives, which that whole exercise covers, is to have our engineers be proactive. It's not just the team's, management consultant or the leader, or the project lead or the director who reach out to your build relationships. If you have a question about something, don't wait till the next stand up. If you have the availability, just ping directly a point of contact that you think might be able to point you in the right direction, and start establishing, be proactive in seeking information, because the more chatter and dialogue and flow you can get going back and forth, the more instantaneous power and the more like collective knowledge is able to apply to any given discussion, as long as you're bringing attention to it. So I would encourage people to be proactive, get your, roll up your sleeves and just get going. As long as you know the general right direction, let it fly and fail fast. Get out there, get it going. Don't have analysis paralysis, looking at something for 3 weeks. If you're in that position, ask for help. But otherwise, when in doubt, go and move in the right direction. Start digging.
Yeah, I like the part, especially about the planning part, because even if I just planned a trip to from like Seattle to LA, right? I do need to know where I'm going, and then I gotta know, and knowing where I'm going to LA, but I got to stop at Portland first, then maybe I go to San Fran and check the weather and everything else, right? So I do need to have my true north, but periodically assess if I'm off by a little bit, because as we know, even if you're just off by a little bit, if you continue down that path, you're going to end up in a very, very different place, like end up in Phoenix or something, right?
100%. And that's why I say fail fast, because what we're trying to do is deliver functionality that we can show.
Right.
Because no matter what, when your stakeholders see something actually working, they're going to be filled with ideas. But if you start and you build it and you show it, you can course correct without having to stop and go backwards.
Yeah.
So fail fast, get functionality. Perfection is your enemy here. Functionality is your friend. What you want to do is build it to work, show it off, and then iterate to perfection.
Yeah, I just looked it up because one of my favorite quote was from President Eisenhower, right? So he said, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything." So
Right.
what he meant was like, the fact that you're planning is, is good, but then don't stick to this rigid, static plan, right? Because they don't survive reality. But it's great, and then it fits perfectly into what you talked about in the automation planning. It's just like planning is everything, but it's also worthless. You just got to go course correct and validate.
Man, I tell you, in my experience, there is just there's so much complexity dealing with large enterprises
Hmm.
that we just, it's okay to make assumptions, but say that assumption out loud in front of other knowledgeable people. And if you all still admit that everyone knows it's an assumption, nobody can validate, then that's just a task, because you just got to close these things out, because we can take approaches that take quite a lot of effort to work up, and then it gets to an approval phase, and then there's, it's under the purview, or somebody has visibility that's a totally separate organization, but there's some legitimate infrastructure reason that can't so understand what it takes to get this done, communicate it, but also understand technically what your options are. I think the planning value is there, because even if you're good at understanding and sorting out your options, even if you, like you said, you, you, day one happens and your plan's out the window, at least you have a skill set at sourcing, vetting, and deciding on options.
Yeah. Can you over communicate though, Matt? Do you think, because we've been to these projects where the conference call is like 100 people, right? Like, and then
Oh,
and
yeah.
then it becomes nobody's problem. And so,
Yeah.
can you actually like what's your solution, right? What's your middle ground in including the
I
right people, but no more?
I agree with you 100%. Yes, you can never communicate. My whole thing is, I think that people are so, what is the word, when you become, there's so much static that you become deaf to it, right?
Right, right, right.
You get
You get this
tone deaf.
tolerance, right? Yeah.
Like emails, here's 11 bullets about what we did. Be accountable, every team member. We need to do that just on a weekly at most, because nobody consumes email like that. So, but you need to do it with earnestness. That's, I guess, my thing is, hey, this is where we're at, guys. We talked about the goal. We understand the value of the big picture. This is where we're at. This is what we need. Communicate to only the people that are directly like in the chain of action, and
Mhm.
really leave the other noise for the person like, you know me. I mean, somebody who is customer facing as well. uh, yeah, you don't want cooks in your kitchen as you can help it, but you have to get all the key stakeholders involved. So that's the line, really. You understand who are the stakeholders, who the whole customer, the customer leadership, and then other key dependency stakeholders is where I'd keep it. And I agree with you. You'd really get yourself in trouble by broadcasting too much information, because they just bog you down with trivial questions and things like that, if nothing else.
Yeah, I guess that comes from experience, wouldn't it? That, identifying the key holders. But if you're doing it for the first time, I could see somebody having a difficulty, right? Like somebody who's been dealing with Cisco's and, network design their whole career or most of their career. Now you're asking them to look out from their cubicle and identifying like the key stakeholders, how to talk business terms, how to tell them about the value that you bring, right? I could see that's kind of difficult for the first time, but what you're saying is it's worth that practice to learn from the Matts of their world to do all these necessary steps because the payoff is great at the end.
Yes, and I'm speaking about, that's a great distinction. I'm really talking about automation teams as a whole, not
Hmm.
not into in. If your job is automation, your love is automation, I'm only saying, ask these questions to the people who can be accountable for those answers. You don't have to go chasing off and do that, but think on the plane where you're asking the questions so that you can at least have somebody where you're waiting on an answer to validate something that you're not making a dangerous assumption.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. So if you're a gamer, right? Like you have those like Street Fighter characters, right? You have like strength is 10, but the capacity, like
Yeah,
military bullet
delegate.
capacity is
Yes,
4.
yes,
So you're
yes.
looking at your whole team. So you're looking at that person who has the communication skill as 10, and then you're the technical skill as,
Yeah,
8. So then combine, you're
that's
a
right.
great team.
That's right. Delegate that to the person who within the team can handle that. But when you build good teams, you have a regular working cadence to establish these relationships, and a lot of times there'll be somebody, there'll be a project manager, a scrum master. If you're in agile, a scrum master or a product owner is who needs to be accountable for getting you, the team member, the answer to that question.
Yeah. But I mean, don't having said that, right? Don't let us stop you from,
No, that
getting to this film.
especially once if you're proactive and you're engaged beyond just to your scrum master and PO, and you're engaged with the client, that will be super organic and you can get your own answer. But if you're not in that situation, you have a path to get that.
Yeah, and I think that kind of corresponds to what we talked about in the beginning of our conversation, right? If you're in a startup scenario, there are more likely of chances that you start wearing different hats. That you could be the scrum master, and you could be the guys on the keyboard. You could be, doing the procurement. Then maybe perhaps in the bigger organization where you're very focused on this vertical, and you have to
Yeah,
go out of your way to learn those skill sets.
that's 100%. Yeah, there's so many permutations of it, but ultimately, that's, I've seen engineering teams that rotate scrum master and PO roles, that they just all just straight up engineers.
Mm,
But they're following the practice because there's some value in eliciting feedback from different perspectives so that everyone's informed and, ideas grow organically. Hey, if that's the problem you're having, it explains why I'm dealing with this over here. Boom, let's meet in the middle, and now let's start solving the solution, not the problem, not the symptom.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just good team camaraderie, which is important to have.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's a great point. I mean, back to we talked about Amazon, right? So I know for a fact, I've witnessed firsthand, right? Jeff Bezos actually and the senior team actually periodically go take customer calls, right? So like the next time they do chatbots nowadays, right? But the next time if you do get a human being, maybe you'll be Andy Jesse. I don't know. But back to your point about you're rotating responsibility, so you get a glimpse of what other people's are doing, and then who knows, right? You may be a great scrum master and you're just like, and you're just been doing CLIs. So,
I guess, yeah, and I guess to the point to the audience, it is if you're on a team that's doing network automation, it's understand that a team will work together and identify the challenges that they need to be, and they'll self-delegate and they will self-actualize and they will put that steps together. That's not everyone's case, but even if you have a dedicated role in a certain way, you're definitely going to come into new problems, and great teams are habitually engaged with each other and the problem they're trying to solve to the point that they can actually manifest solutions that can work so fast. And you don't need all this, emails and instructions and everything else, because they're riding the wave of the effort. They're not trying to figure out where the surfboard is and catch the next wave in. Anyway, I don't know if that analogy makes any sense.
No, it definitely does, right? I'm just picturing this like well-oiled machine, right? And then
And
it's
when it's
kind of
good, it's so good. Yeah.
yeah. When it works, it's
It's
beautiful, right?
beautiful. I
It's
love it.
perfect.
Yeah, that's right. Love when
Yeah.
the plan
So
comes together.
again, plug in whatever your favorite sports team is, right? Like when everybody's doing their part, when the linemen are blocking, the running back is running, and your wide receiver are running the right route, blocking as needed. Man, it's beautiful, and that I believe is why I watch American football, right? Because
Dude, honestly, you're in the zone. It's like, remember that, what was the NBA 2K when the basketball got on fire and you're in fuego and then, you get on a streak? That's a great
yeah,
flow to get
for the
into. Yeah.
slam. Yeah.
In
Anyways,
fuego.
like people who play into NBA 2K knows what we're talking about. But if you don't, go look up some YouTube videos. You'll see what we're talking about. So Matt, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoy our conversation. I know we cover a wide range of topics, but is there any, like, before we go, is there any call to action that you want people to take away from our conversation? Either something I miss, you want to bring up, or anything that you want to just mention before we wrap it up?
No, I would say, well, I say no, then I start explaining, right? Like, no, I would say, pay attention to the bigger picture.
Mhm.
Just understand it, thematically the big moving parts and pieces, whether it's industry changes, whether it's within a client firm changes, or if there's competing factions, or if we're moving in a technological direction that, it's a this or that, we could go this way or that way. Um, be be uh, be willing to talk about that, at least within your team, and say, I'm noticing this, I'm seeing that. Get some dialogue going, because a lot of times we take it for granted that, leadership folks are super happy to engage in that discussion. That's very insightful for them. So be proactive about talking about what you're seeing from that standpoint. Um, and have just positive intent. Because you can break silos and make such good relationships if you're coming at it in a way that's, I'm here to make the world a better place. I'm trying to do good. Um, you know, you can cut through resistance, and it's pretty rewarding as well. And you can make things happen so much faster by building good relationships, even on short notice with, external people you've never met. Go out there and don't be shy about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think you could afford to be vulnerable if you have good intention, because people recognize that. So I enjoy that piece of recommendation, and thanks so much for being here, Matt. I really enjoy our conversation.
Blast, Eric. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for listening to this episode of Network Automation Nerds. Do you have any feedbacks for Network Automation, our guest Matt today? or this episode in general, please send us some follow-ups at packetpushers.net/follow-up. We do want to hear from you. And please check out our website at packetpushers.net to find other network engineering focused blogs, newsletters, podcasts, YouTube videos, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, I really appreciate it if you take a moment to leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Your review really helps other network engineers discover the show and keep us motivated and bring you more great content like this one. We thank you, the wonderful listeners, for your support. Last but not least, remember that too much network automation will never be enough.